Welcome to the Wandering Tangent Podcast. I'm BJ, with me is Jeff, and today we're talking about the 1961 movie, King Kong vs. Godzilla.
Yes, this is an ultimately great King Kong movie.
Now, I have to ask because despite the fact I'm the big Godzilla fan in this, it was your idea to watch this one, so I have to ask, why do we start with the third movie in the Godzilla series?
Because you always start with the one that has the best miniature Sherman tanks that shoot at Godzilla with what looks like fireworks. Because that is what... honestly, because I don't know Godzilla movies, I'm really going through this mostly for the first time. I've seen bits and pieces, whereas you know the whole thing really well.
Yeah, I will straight up admit that I think I own every Godzilla movie since I bought the Criterion collection of the earlier series. So yeah, I think I own every Godzilla movie.
Yeah, every single one ever made, right?
Yeah, even.
And you've seen them all. Of course, you own them, and you've seen them all.
Yep.
And you also know them fairly well, a lot more than most people would know Godzilla.
I enjoy them. I've never really dived deep into them before, so I wouldn't call myself an expert.
Okay.
But while I am a fan of the Godzilla series as a whole, I will admit they're not perfect films, and this might be a bit of unpopular opinion, but King Kong vs. Godzilla is not one of my favorite Godzilla movies.
Okay. That's interesting. So yeah, I have only seen a few films. I saw the original one, which is the original black and white one with Perry Mason, which I know that's how I talk about actors, is I just talk about their most famous role as their identity. But
and kind of on that same subject, we should have coordinated this before and we talked about watching it, but I assume we both watched the American version.
Yes, that's a correct assumption.
Okay.
So I only have the American version. And the Japanese version, from what I understand, is the same. Only a couple of the scenes were replaced with a Japanese newscast.
I have actually never had the chance to watch the original Japanese version. I would assume it's going to be like the difference between the original Gojira and Godzilla in that they have the edited scenes for Western audiences. So like I assume the UN stuff is not in the original Japanese release.
Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, so we're not talking about the Japanese version.
No,
and it seems like the news items in the Godzilla movies are there to just kind of help you know what's going on.
Which is kind of silly in the Godzilla movie, but it was what it was at the time.
It's kind of helpful for me to have somebody narrate a little bit. But anyway, we are starting on a weird film to start off with. And first, let's start with you. What is your take? Not previous beliefs, but now having watched it again, what do you think, BJ?
Like I said before, it's a fun movie, but it's not one of the stronger Godzilla films. I think there's even some in the Showa era movies, which is the earliest Godzilla series, that are better than it.
What do you like about Godzilla movies? Is it the duels between two giant monsters? Or is it the characters and plot development and all that behind the scenes?
Especially in the earlier Godzilla movies, this one kind of sets the tone for a lot of the future releases. In that, well, I guess for a while, and then like Godzilla vs. Mothra, it's a little touch more serious. Obviously, the longer the Godzilla series goes along, the less serious it gets. The original Godzilla, especially the Japanese version, is a very dark movie. It's about the horrors of nuclear bomb. And even the second movie, Godzilla Raids Again, is a pretty serious movie. It touches on the destruction that the monsters wreak, and they talk about being strong to rebuild afterwards. And I don't know what. Are we allowed to spoil?
No, I don't know if we're allowed to spoil yet.
That'll spoil some other movies in the non-spoiler section of this one.
I know. It's very easy to spoil things. especially when you're just wandering through a tangenting conversation. Um, so let's just general about Godzilla. He's a villain, but there's also a sense of neutrality to him. Like he's evil, but he's just, I mean, he's doing what a monster would do. And so he's kind of portrayed as just kind of a neutral character of destruction.
Well, later on in the series, Godzilla very much becomes the hero character. At this point in the series, and probably up through the next one, Godzilla vs. Mothra, he's still solidly a villain. I think after Godzilla vs. Mothra, he tends to be cast more in a sort of neutral protector role. You know, he's a monster, but he's our monster. But later on, he's definitely cast in a more heroic role.
Hmm. So this is the third movie you're saying, right? There was two
Yes.
more before this. There's the original black and white one. What's
Yeah,
the one in the middle?
the one in the middle is Godzilla Raids Again, which was also black and white. It, I like it. It's, as far as others go, or in others' opinions, I think more highly of it than some other people do. Godzilla Raids Again is the first one that features a monster brawl. It's Godzilla versus Anguirus, which is the spiky kind of armadillo-looking monster. I don't know if you have
Okay.
any idea what I'm talking about.
No, but I mean your description definitely is intriguing.
Well, armadillo is probably not a great description, but it it gets the rough idea across. I mean, well, then again, this was also like probably over 10 years ago. I know we did watch Final Wars together at a friend's house, and Anguirus is in that, but then again, a lot of the monsters in Final Wars just kind of have a brief little cameo appearance.
Hmm. Well, so what's unique about this, the Godzilla versus King Kong, is that King Kong is already a popular canonized figure in his own films. So it's definitely a way to draw in the audience. You get these two very famous characters to come together in a film.
It's easy to call it Godzilla versus King Kong now because Godzilla's a bigger name, but it is King Kong versus Godzilla because when the movie was made, Kong Kong was seen as the bigger draw. I mean, according to the research I did, Toho, the Japanese company that made all the Godzilla movies, they paid RKO Pictures, which owned the Kong copyright at the time. Let me see. Let me read my notes. Toho paid RKO Pictures over $200,000 just for the right to King Kong,
Hmm.
and the film's production budget was about $420. So they almost paid half as much just for Kong as they did to make the movie.
That's yeah. They don't make him look a lot like King Kong.
From what I read, that was part of the deal with RKO Pictures. They had to alter what Kong looked like, and that's one of my hangups with the movie is that I think the Godzilla suit looks okay. It's not the best Godzilla suit, but the Kong suit is just terrible,
Okay.
in my opinion at least. What, as I guess a connoisseur, I don't really like the look of Kong, but as someone less experienced in the giant monster genre, what did you think about it?
I never really liked it until watching it recently, but it's starting to grow on me because it's just more of a freakish looking face. King Kong, well, it's like the modern King Kong movies. King Kong has a very gorilla face. It has a lot of calm expressions as well as angry expressions, and this one he just looks more like from a horror film. Like his face looks like it is almost like he's wearing a mask that is supposed to look scary, like an old Japanese play where they wear more frightening looking masks for different characters. Kind of reminds me of that a little bit. And I sort of wonder, did they try to make his face look like that, look a little scary on purpose, or was it just that they put the costume together and it ended up that way?
Well, I read that they had to reduce how much Godzilla looked, and I could
Yeah,
be wrong on this. This was a little bit of research I did last night,
right.
so I don't know the full details.
So they
I
couldn't make
read
the
that,
character exactly the same.
yeah, so the kind of reduce what the kind of reduce the I guess the gorilla-ness of Kong. instead of sculpting the face based off a gorilla, they did it off I think the Japanese snow monkeys. You know what I'm talking about? I think it might be based on those,
You
but
mean like the snow monkeys that jump into the hot water pools?
yeah, I think it's based off those. I know it's based off some Japanese primate. I don't know how many monkeys are in Japan. That's just the one I know. So
He seems a little
I
bit more
could,
like an orangutan, but he's still kind of more of a gorilla. His arms are much longer, and when he raises his arms above his head, they're like flailing, and it's interesting.
I guess before we get off in spoiler territory, we'll do some fun facts. I did air quotes on that because a lot of the facts on the making of King Kong vs. Godzilla are not very fun for how silly a movie it is.
Really?
Yeah. So, so the concept of what ultimately became King Kong vs. Godzilla was originally developed as King Kong Beats Frankenstein by Willis O'Brien, he was one of the original animators from the original King Kong.
Wow, King Kong versus Frankenstein?
King Kong versus Frankenstein.
That would have been a match. A strange match indeed.
So after O'Brien came with the project, he started working with a producer named John Beck to help produce the film, hence getting a producer. And at the time, because it was being done by O'Brien, it was going to be a stop motion piece in the nature of King Kong.
Yeah.
But at the time, stop motion was expensive to do, so it didn't generate much interest. So what happened is that Beck, the producer, actually went behind O'Brien's back to give the script to Toho, and O'Brien was against it, but he lacked the funds to legally challenge the transaction. O'Brien would actually die in November 1961, and his wife would later cite the stress of that ordeal as one of the contributing factors to O'Brien's death.
Ooh.
And then Marion C. Cooper, who was one of the original creators of Godzilla, he was also opposed to the project, and he tried to sue Toho and Universal to stop the film from being distributed, but the lawsuit didn't go through because it turns out he was not the legal owner of Kong. So there's some...
So a long legal battle before a film gets made.
There were some shady deals for it ended up being an extremely goofy movie.
Yeah.
And King Kong vs. Godzilla was the fourth highest grossing movie in Japan of that year. And
okay.
one more
small
tidbit. In the Western release, which was the version we saw, pretty much none of the original film score made it in. They used soundtracks from older films, most notably The Creature from the Black Lagoon. When I was watching it last night, I could have sworn I heard a couple of musical stingers from The Thing from Another World in there, but I could be wrong on that.
Okay.
And that's all my quote-unquote...
You're saying the original soundtrack, it had an original soundtrack and they threw that out?
Yeah, they threw it out and used sound... As far as the Western release goes, the original soundtrack was pretty much all replaced with sound from American movies to give it a more quote-unquote Western sound.
Ah, okay. Yeah, so that's the Japanese version that has the original soundtrack, probably.
Yeah. Which, again, I haven't had a chance to watch yet, so I cannot comment from my own experience on the differences there.
Okay, so I will tell you what I think of this movie.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Fired Will Commander.
Okay. It had a storyline that was really hard for me to follow, and I really had to review it several times to pick up on this storyline. And when I usually watch Godzilla movies, I tune out the storyline. I do. I admit that, because I'm really just waiting around to see which power plant he stomps on, and to just hear a bit of dialogue from the characters, and whatever comes else from that. That's what I enjoy. But this time I tried to actually pick up on the storyline, and it was hard to follow. But I really like how the Japanese didn't want to do stop animation. They wanted to do regular live filming with miniatures, and they wanted to go on a grand scale with it. The Japanese, these early films, they go all out when it comes to these sets, and I always have really liked that. Just even if they're not perfectly well done, it's just the enthusiasm for it, because they just add so many buildings and so many different vehicles and trains and ships and ocean and icebergs, and it's fun. It's fun to have all of this stuff in the movie. And so I enjoyed all of that. The storyline was it's funny and kind of like a it's like entertaining for me to watch, but at the same time it's hard to follow. It wouldn't be a storyline that I think would be good in most films because it's just harder to follow, I think, for people. Because you have to really pay attention to a few key lines in the film. And if you miss those lines because you're eating a bunch of popcorn or somebody's asking you a question about King Kong or Godzilla, which happened to me because I watched it with people and it was like I have to do a Q&A while I'm trying to keep up with the movie. And so if you miss these little lines, it's a lot harder to follow. And I think a lot of films, they do a lot to try and make the plot simple enough, and they have a lot of very obvious lines or obvious scenes where it's really easy to know what's going on. And this film, it's a lot harder to understand those plot points. So it's kind of like, one creature shows up and you're like, why is he there? Why did he come here? What's going on? And yeah, it's harder to follow those things. But if you don't care about that, just sit back and watch the scenes. Watch all the fun sequences. And it's entertaining just like that.
I was going to say that we must have had very different they're very different viewing experiences because you have kids and I don't. And I was like, the plot wasn't that complex, but
no.
then again, we're...
and that's the thing. Like, you watch a Godzilla movie and you're like, yeah, I follow this plot. With me, though, it's different because I don't pay attention to films like most people. So if you got one key line, there's a chance I might miss it, and so I have to rewatch it to see what's going on. And and I did watch it with people with kids who didn't know anything about Godzilla or King Kong. They barely knew anything, so I have to explain, like, oh yeah, this is the atomic breath, this is that, and this, and they don't understand, like, why is the creature doing this? What's its motivation? Yeah, so to explain King Kong and Godzilla's motivation, that's it's an interesting task. He just wants to step on things.
What's the motivation of the giant radioactive monster? What's Godzilla feeling right now?
Yeah, what is he feeling? How does this power plant make him feel? Why does he step on it? Anyway, should we get into spoilers? You ready?
I was gonna say, I guess when we get into the spoiler section, if you have any questions about the deep and complex plot of King Kong versus Godzilla, I'll try to clarify it for you. So, if you want to jump into spoilers, we can do that if you want.
Yeah. Let's do spoilers. I love spoilers.
Okay, so what deep and burning questions do you have about the plot of King Kong versus Godzilla?
It took a long time to understand what a submarine in the Arctic had to do with anything. And I watched it the first time, and things are moving along in the story, and then suddenly this submarine crashes into an iceberg. There's chaos, and then Godzilla merges out of that iceberg. And I just thought, how did this lead up to this point? But apparently there was this warm current mysteriously coming from the Arctic, and so they sent a UN submarine to just go and research what was happening. And for some reason, that submarine happened to crash into the iceberg. Like they found this iceberg that had this radioactive glow. So it's obviously something of interest. And so they were getting closer to it, and somehow they crashed into it. And
Yeah, go ahead. They crashed into it because it's like the most incompetent submarine crew ever.
I guess so. It's like, well, we're getting closer. Smash.
It's like, we're getting closer, smash. About 2 minutes later, our sonars are working. You don't say, since you crashed into a iceberg like 10 times the size of your submarine.
Yeah.
So, and actually, believe it or not, the Godzilla being stuck in the iceberg is actually actually touches on how Godzilla Raids Again ended. So, spoiler alert for Godzilla Raids Again.
Well, that's good.
Another 60-year-old movie, which we're bracketing in spoilers for some reason. But at the end of Godzilla Raids Again, they actually bury Godzilla in ice. They basically drop a glacier on him.
Why not?
So,
Okay. So they drop a glacier on him, and then
yeah,
somehow this glacier becomes radioactive later on, and then they accidentally crash into it.
Well, I'm assuming it's radioactive because Godzilla's in it.
Right. Well, it's glowing. Like, it has this strange glow to it that they attribute to radioactivity.
Which might just be something added for the Western version, because there was a couple of times watched this, I'm like, I don't think the people that added in the scenes added in for the Western release actually watched any of the Godzilla movies.
Yeah.
Because there's a couple of times like, oh, so and so at the UN suggested this, and that's what they're doing, because later on in the film they used a electrical grid as like a big electric fence to try to hold off Godzilla, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the Western release, when the UN scientist guys gets credit for that, and I'm like, and I had to go back and double check this just to make sure I wasn't wrong. They do the exact same thing in the original Godzilla movie. They try to use high tension power lines as a fence to keep them out. So it's like, oh, this was the UN scientist's idea. It's like, no, they did the exact same thing in the first movie.
Yeah, it comes straight out of the Godzilla playbook. Electric fences.
Which brings up another weird point in this movie. They just randomly decide halfway through that electricity makes King Kong stronger.
Okay, so from your great knowledge of Godzilla movies, that whole King Kong is strengthened by electricity and lightning. That's new, right? Like, no one... There's nothing in the original King Kong that would make any reference to that.
No, I mean, about the closest thing that I can figure is that maybe that's like a remnant of the original King Kong versus Frankenstein, and maybe originally the idea the power bomb monster with electricity was for Frankenstein. I'm not saying that's a fact. That's just the only theory I can really come up with.
Yeah, that's a theory. It's a good theory. I really... that's a puzzling thing, because if I had to guess which monster would gain strength from electricity, it would probably be Godzilla.
I mean, it comes out so left field that like in the movie they're like airlifting King Kong with balloons.
Oh yeah.
And they're like heading towards a thunderstorm, and when the character's like, oh, there's a thunderstorm, that will make King Kong stronger. And when the other character in the helicopter just kind of looks at him, is like, wait, what? It's like,
yeah.
It's so out of left field that like even the script is like, huh?
Yeah. You have to have some sort of plot device that can make King Kong come back again. Like Superman, who can get sunlight. Like sunlight regenerates him. It's an old mechanic of super creatures or superheroes fighting. You have something that can return their strength. That way you can kind of destroy them and then bring them back again. But it does seem kind of just thrown in there. And what I also was confused about, and I had to watch this several times, is why this pharmaceutical company was trying to get King Kong. Like, all of that didn't make a lot of sense to me. And after rewatching it a couple of times and going over the dialogue, it still doesn't fully make sense, to be honest. But it seems like they're motivated to get publicity for this pharmaceutical company, and there's a communications company that is trying to make the pharmaceutical company rich with a marketing campaign of some kind. But they don't really go into in-depth detail about this. It's just kind of like suddenly it's the plot on the screen, and it's not discussed very in a lot of detail, I think. But so they want to get King Kong so that he can make them rich with a publicity campaign, because his communication company is jealous because the other TV networks, they have a lot of Godzilla footage and this other network doesn't, and so they just want a monster so that they can make money off of him. And he's also creating a problem for the pharmaceutical company because there's this special berry that grows on this mysterious island in the South Pacific, Feral Island. And they want the berry to use as for medicine, and the natives won't give it up because this Kong creature uses the berries, and they're worried that if they give it up, then it will anger Kong or something like that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, they use the berry too. There's a practical sense. They use the berry to subdue Kong so that he's nicer to live with, I guess. And so that they can actually knock him out whenever they want to.
Yeah, in the UN scenes they added in for the rest of their audiences, they say that the berry is a non-habit forming narcotic, even though
there's no such thing, probably.
Well, I don't know how non-habit forming it is when Kong seems to crave the stuff pretty hard.
Yeah, they claim that it's non-habit forming, but it certainly works well on Kong as far as forming habits, because he likes the stuff a lot.
So yeah, as far as I can tell, I think the pharmaceutical company and the television company are like the same company.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense, and I sort of thought it was like that, because one of the main businessmen, he represents both the companies, is how he describes himself.
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking it was either he was in the communications business, and he just has they're like a client of his, or yeah, it could be that they're just two companies that have the same parent company, something like that.
I mean, I guess in a way it kind of follow to a certain extent. It sort of follows the plot of the original King Kong, except that, at least in the American version, I don't know if this is true in the original Japanese, they go to the island with the express purpose of getting Kong to use as a marketing campaign or whatever.
Yes, and that is true. Whereas, they bring Kong into the movie the same way they did the original King Kong.
Yeah. It's weird because the first two movies are very serious, and then you get to this one where they get King Kong high on berries so they can use a balloon to airlift him to fight Godzilla.
Yeah. The first time I watched this movie, I sort of thought that the plot was that they were going to get King Kong because of Godzilla, because Godzilla does the rampaging in the beginning. He's heading towards Japan, and he even wrecks a few things. And so the idea is, hey, let's get another monster to fight this monster, which kind of makes sense towards the end, because they do that. They try to get these two guys to get together for a fight, which is the balloon scene, which is hilarious. But that's not at all. It's just that one rampaging monster isn't good enough for business. They need to make more profits. And so they need another monster so that other TV companies and this pharmaceutical company can make money as well. It's a strange thing. Yeah.
In all fairness, they do sort of launch the hunt for Kong before Godzilla gets awakened by the most incompetent submarine crew in the world.
It's true. So the point where they really want Kong is when he sends another message, like, give me Kong. That's when Godzilla's attacking. But really, they launched that whole plan earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's part of it. I mean, you may not think of it that way, but to me, it is harder to pick up on that. And when I'm watching it with people, they're always asking me, what's happening in this plot? What's going on? Why are they doing this? Why are they suddenly on this island? There's all sorts of those kind of questions. But for someone like you that really more of a connoisseur of Godzilla movies, that kind of a plot is just, there's no issue. But I think for average people, it will be more difficult to really understand what's going on. But that may not be a problem because you can just enjoy the film without really worrying about too many details.
I think in my case, it's more the benefit of I get to just sit down and watch a movie where you as a dad don't really get that option very often.
No, not very
Very
often.
different viewing experiences.
Yeah. So, what'd you think of the dance? It's not enough to drug King Kong. You have to like dance and sing him to sleep too. What did you think of that?
I think the whole island sequence would not play well in like today's audiences.
No, you're right, but I mean
But
back then it was fine.
yeah, but kind of besides that, I mean, they, I guess it's been so long since I've seen the first King Kong. They kind of had something like that in the first King Kong, didn't they? Or at least
I don't remember anything
I,
like that.
I don't think it was quite to the same extent where they're like actively trying to pacify Kong. It was I could
I
be wrong. It's
remember
been
that
so long.
what I remember of the first one of this first King Kong film is that the the people that came to find him, they threw gas bombs at him to try to get him to go to sleep. But they had to I guess yeah, they
Oh,
threw the gas bombs, it made him fall asleep, and then they tied him up. And maybe I don't know, maybe the natives did some sort of ritual as part of that, but
I'm
I don't
trying to think
remember
of
anything like
yeah,
that.
I'm trying to remember more of what the natives did. I know at the time Toho did kind of have a thing with islanders and monsters going on because in Mothra, which came out before this one, and oh boy, the original Mothra is something, dude. I need to make you watch that someday.
You
Uh,
do.
so like in the original Mothra is a very similar thing where Mothra was worshipped as a god on this island. Though in this case it was more well, that's not something we need to stray down at this point if I'm going to inflict the original Mothra on you at some point. But
But that sounds
so
like it's the same plot. It's a group of natives who have a
uh,
giant monster as a god, and that's like King Kong.
well, it's kind of the same thing except well, yeah, except that in King Kong they always bring King Kong to the rest of the world, whereas in Mothra they take someone from the island and then Mothra shows up to get those people back because
Wow. What a
that's the very
heroic motivation.
yeah, Mothra for being a giant moth is generally one of the more quote unquote heroic monsters in the Toho lineup.
Huh.
But no, man, I've only actually seen the original Japanese version of Mothra once, and it is so different than the Western version. It's wild. The Western version is kind of a more standard monster flick. The Japanese version is like a commentary on the Cold War.
We should watch the Japanese one.
Yeah, as you might have guessed, I have the Blu-ray version of that. If we choose to watch it sometime, I'll lend it to you.
Okay.
Okay. Anyway, what were we talking about?
That is a good question. What were
Uh,
we talking about?
let's see.
We were talking about the island and the
Yeah,
natives
yeah.
and the
Okay.
dance.
The
And
dance. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it is a funny scene where the King Kong comes up to them and he's all growly and snarly and they have these jars and they all run away and they've left the jars there in front of him and so he just sits there,
Oh,
drinks it up.
if I remember correctly, because I just watched this last night, they were getting the jars together, and then like a giant octopus attacks for some reason.
Oh yeah, the octopus. You know, I
And
don't understand how that octopus looked so good. Usually when they are outside their tank, they're like really flat and floppy. Is it
oh,
just me?
well,
I'm not a marine biologist, but
neither am I. But
it seemed like that octopus looked really well. I don't know.
well, from what I read, they shot those scenes using 4 different octopi,
Yeah.
whatever the scientific word is, and they would encourage it to move by blowing hot air on it or something like that. That's what I read. I don't know how true that is.
Hmm.
And of course, where the guy in the suit is actually like fighting the octopus, like picking it up and throwing it around. That was a octopus puppet.
Yeah. That much is very much uh very understandable.
So giant octopus comes out of nowhere to attack. Kong comes out of nowhere to attack the octopus, and at that point, Kong gets high on the non-habit forming narcotic berries.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I completely missed that scene. It's they take one of the kids and they ask him to go get some berries, and then suddenly there's like dangerous foreshadowing, like, oh no, he's out there alone, and then here comes the octopus creature.
There's just octopus for reasons.
Yeah, for reasons.
For
Yep.
reasons.
Yeah, that fight scene is good. If you like fight scenes like that, which I do, I love an old 1960s giant monster fight scene.
I will say more or less the fight scenes are okay in this. There was a couple of them I noticed, mainly towards the end of the movie, where it just seemed like they had, and I rewound this to make sure I wasn't just crazy, but for the life of me, it looks like a couple of times they, for the life of me, it looks like they have a couple of action figures and are like bumping them together, like what a little kid would do when they have their action figures fight, and they
They had a lot of little dolls of people in this movie at different points.
yeah, I mean it is a King Kong movie, so they had to throw in a pretty girl in there for some reason, though
Yeah, the monster has to pick up a pretty girl and carry her away.
like I spent this entire movie trying to figure out what the plot point of of the girl and her boyfriend was. It's like, okay, so the girl's there to get attacked by Kong a couple of times, and the boyfriend's there because he, for some reason, has this like unbreakable wire that, at the very beginning of the movie, he gives. Is that the boyfriend or the brother that has the wire?
Um,
It's the boyfriend, isn't it?
I think it's the
I think
brother.
it's the boyfriend.
I don't know.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Anyway.
The characters don't matter. The characters don't matter in this movie, really.
Yeah.
But no, I think it's the boyfriend because it's the brother who goes on the expedition, and the boyfriend has the wire. Oh, you should take some of this wire out of it with you. It's stronger than steel. And then, for some reason, at the exact right moment, he has hundreds and hundreds of braided cable of this wire, exactly when they need it
Mm-hmm.
to airlift Kong.
Yeah, they introduced that early on, just so that later on, they can actually make King Kong float away in the sky.
And apparently, the Japanese self-defense forces are ready for anything because they just happen to have these giant balloons and enough helium to lift this giant monster.
Yeah, they are prepared. They're very prepared.
And they have it in like 10 minutes. It's like, okay, yeah, we can do it. Let's just, we have those balloons stored 5 miles down the road here.
Yeah, it's really
What?
quite. They perform quite incredibly. They even dig a giant pit in like a day, and they line it with dynamite. They cover it with plants so that it's a pit that is concealed. And they do all of this within like 1 or 2 days or something. When in reality, that would take like months to set up.
Yeah,
Anyway,
this is definitely one of the monster movies that can't think too hard to plot about.
No. Yep. And they use gasoline and they light these fires to kind of get Godzilla to go in a certain direction so he can fall into this pit. If there's one thing about this movie is that it tells you that explosives just never work on giant monsters. Yet it's what the humans always seem to be trying over and over again. Let's try to blow them up. Nope, they don't blow up. Let's hit them with cannons. Nope, they don't go down. Let's hit them with rockets. Let's put them in a pit and then have this huge explosion. Nope, doesn't work.
Oh, I mean, explosions are flashy and fun to look at.
That's true. And we're sort of like bouncing around in this movie. I know that we decided not to do like a play-by-play because then I don't know if a play-by-play is really all that great in a commentary. Because if you're going to enjoy the movie, then you're going to watch it and see all these scenes together.
I mean, we just kind of hit the memorable bits. And I know we talked for a long time on Forbidden Planet, assuming this comes out after we post Forbidden Planet. But I don't think, this is a fun movie. And it sort of lays the groundwork for later Godzilla movies. But I don't think it's as quote-unquote important as Forbidden Planet was. If you I don't know if I'm saying that right, but you know what I mean. It's not as groundbreaking, I guess.
Right. Forbidden Planet was a make you think movie, and it was, I think, a good impact into the science fiction genre itself. But this movie it's definitely shows how the Godzilla franchise is like evolving, and it's adding in more characters, and yeah. But you're right. Like, if this movie didn't exist, you would still have a lot of other films.
I mean,
Um,
yeah. I mean, obviously, I'm not saying that the Godzilla movies are important or fun because, obviously, the first Godzilla movie came out in 1954, and they're making Godzilla movies to this day. I went and saw
yeah,
Godzilla versus King Kong in theaters last year. That's almost 70 years after the first one,
yeah,
but it I guess it doesn't have as far-reaching impact on the genre. I mean, I guess kaiju movies are sci-fi, but kind of a more defined niche. Whereas I guess Forbidden Planet kind of affected sci-fi more as a whole.
yeah.
Plus, I guess the important movie in the Godzilla series it's always going to be it's going to be Gojira. That's the groundbreaker and the trendsetter. And Godzilla vs King Kong is it's just kind of fun, and it's the first movie in the series that, well, I guess it's kind of the first movie in the series that kind of edges it towards what it sort of became in the end, which is more fun and kind of kid friendly as compared to like I said, the first two movies are much more serious affairs.
They're like serious disaster movies, but then this one is, I don't know, they kind of take on a bigger meaning, like how disaster is something that happens, and this unstoppable force, and I don't know.
And in this one, they
That,
get King Kong high to fight Godzilla.
yeah. Yeah.
So
Really, King Kong is not big enough to fight Godzilla. This is me speaking outside of the movie, but if I really was to match these two characters up in my head, I would say Godzilla is way tougher than King Kong. I mean, King Kong could climb Godzilla like he's a building.
of course, you're talking about like the original King Kong. Yes, the original King Kong was much smaller than the original Godzilla, and of course later movies, they have the proper monster brawl. They have to make King Kong their own thing or find justifications as to why a giant monkey can fight a radioactive dinosaur creature, which is I guess why they did the electricity thing, because like after Kong gets struck by lightning, he gets like electro grip. Like every time he grabs Godzilla, there's like lightning coming out of his fingers or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love their fight sequence. There's two of them. You don't just get one. You get two King Kong and Godzilla fight sequences.
You really want to call the first one a fight sequence? It's more of a encounter because it's like King Kong throws a rock at Godzilla. Godzilla hits King Kong with atomic breath. Kong goes, "Ow, that hurt," and walks away.
Yes, okay, an encounter, but it seems like yeah, this whole idea of let's get these two monsters together so that they'll fight doesn't really work very well. But that's their plan on the second time. Anyway,
Sorry about that.
I
Sorry about
started saying
that.
something and then it didn't make any sense.
You stopped talking as soon. I muted. You stopped talking right when I muted so I could take a drink.
Oh, okay. Sometimes I start a sentence and then I realize it's incorrect halfway through, and I'm like, oh great, now where do I go with that?
So I'm like,
Yeah, but yeah, I like the fight sequences. Godzilla's or King Kong. King Kong is sneaky because while Godzilla's coming up to try and toast him with another atomic breath, he knows how to sneak behind a cliff and wait. And then when he comes around, he jumps out and gets him.
in some of the UN scenes, as they're like setting up the fight or whatever, they do try to label Kong as, oh, Kong's a primate, so he's a thinking monster. Even though it seems like most times his plans sort of backfire, and and Godzilla just kind of whomps him anyway.
Yeah. Am I wrong in assuming that you I mean, you obviously just watch these movies like most people, but there's a part of you somehow that really wants to cheer for Godzilla. Am I wrong about that?
I mean, it more or less in the presence of hindsight, yes, and like in this movie in particular, again, I don't know if this is a widespread opinion or just me, but at the very least the Godzilla suit looks a lot nicer than the Kong suit, so it's like, oh, these two monsters, I'd rather spend more time with Godzilla. But so so that actually brings up another thing I was meaning to ask you about. So I know that you are a self-proclaimed non-expert on these sort of things, but have you ever heard of the the two ending myth about this movie?
No, I've never heard
Okay.
about the two ending myth of this movie.
So for the longest time, there was the idea that there were two separate endings based on where this movie was based on the version of the movie you saw. Because at the end of the movie, it's Kong that comes out of the water and they're like, oh, Godzilla disappeared without a trace, and Kong swimming home. So Kong theoretically gets the W. For the
Sort
longest
of.
time,
Yeah,
well,
it's somewhat implied, but you don't really know for sure.
well, Kong's the one swimming away. He's the one riding off in the sunset, so to speak.
Okay.
For the longest time, there's a rumor that in the Japanese release that it was King Kong, or I'm sorry, it was Godzilla that won. That Godzilla would be the one to, come out of the water and swim away because obviously King Kong was the Western monster and Godzilla was the Eastern monster.
Hmm. Okay.
Based on where, and this rumor was so widespread that actually made it into a version of Trivial Pursuit.
Really?
Yeah, where the question was, who won in the Japanese version of Godzilla versus King Kong? And according to Trivial Pursuit, the right answer was Godzilla. But that never happened. It was just a very persistent rumor that lasted for a very long time.
Yeah, well,
Because like,
most people probably have never watched the Japanese version. Until, I mean, nowadays you can get almost any film. You just gotta look it up and order it. But back then it would have been harder to actually get a hold of a copy. Am I wrong?
oh yeah, I mean,
Am I wrong? Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
no. I mean, oh yeah, in the sense that you're not wrong.
Okay.
Because, back when I was a kid, back in the olden days, to try to catch whatever Godzilla movie I could, every Friday when the TV guide came out, I would flip back to the movie section. Back in the day for all you young kids out there, they didn't have the nice little guide built into the TV where it would say what you're watching and whatnot. You would have to go into TV. They would print a TV guide in the newspaper, and you'd have to, look ahead to see what was come out that week, and they would have a movie section in the back. So, I'd flip through the movie section to see if there's the odd chance of there being a Godzilla movie on some station this week. Usually not. Or if there was, it was usually at like 2 o'clock in the morning, so I'd have to sneak out of bed to,
You snuck out of
you know...
bed to watch Godzilla movies?
Well, I don't know if I snuck out of bed, but I definitely stayed up later than I should have. I
Yeah.
remember being out in the front room to watch Godzilla 1984 at some point.
Oh, see, and that is my favorite one, the 1984 Godzilla.
Yeah, and back in the day, they would, I think it was TNT or TBS, they would always have a Godzilla movie marathon on New Year's Eve. So I have a bunch of VHS tapes of me just recording all those during the New Year's Eve marathons.
That's
That's
great.
that's where I got my start as a Godzilla nerd.
Excellent.
Anyway, that was a tangent. What were we talking
Yeah.
about?
You were talking about how the Japanese version had a different ending, but that it turned out to be false.
Yeah. Okay.
And
Yeah. So
yeah, and so the ending, you're saying that because King Kong swam away, and it is pretty funny. I'm sorry, I have to tangent again. But the idea of King Kong being like, all right, I'm done, and then he just goes in the water, decides to swim back to Feral Island. That's incredibly funny to me.
so, and that's actually another thing that got changed in the Western release, because when Godzilla and King Kong fall in the water, in the Western release, it's like this big natural disaster. There's like floods and avalanches and mass destruction. Turns out that's all stock footage from another movie edited in.
Really?
Yeah.
See, I figured they probably just thought, this movie's almost over. Let's just destroy our whole set. Why not?
Apparently in the Japanese version, it's very much just like a little minor earthquake. It's like when they show the characters, like, oh, it's shaking a bit, but like all the flooding and avalanches and stuff, that was stock footage from another movie that got edited in for the Western release.
That's funny. So
Apparently,
okay,
apparently it wasn't dramatic enough of ending. I don't know.
I don't really understand how that earthquake just suddenly happened, but it did, and it was dramatic. But anyway, so what happens in the Japanese version? Do you know this great secret?
Are you talking about the earthquake or?
So they have an earthquake, but it's not as severe, and then they both go into the water, but then one comes out.
Yeah,
and it's King Kong.
Yeah, the only difference between the two endings is that in the Western version they splice in the
extra footage.
The footage of more destruction to make that more dramatic. But outside of that same ending, King Kong swims away, and you don't see Godzilla again.
That must have been a really long swim. Swim across the entire Pacific Ocean. Anyway. But, I mean, do you really interpret that as one winning over the other? When I saw it, I felt like, well, the fight just kind of ended in a draw, and they both went home. And Godzilla, when he leaves, he goes into the deep ocean. Right? Does that fit within Godzilla canon?
That's within the Godzilla canon, but apparently, from what I read, officially, according to Toho, the company that made the movie, King Kong wins.
Okay.
That is what they said.
That's what they say, but can you still... I don't know. I think the movie interpretation, like the interpretation the audience makes, is also a valid point, though. Because if people interpret that it just ended in a draw, there could be some merit to that.
I want to say I had this argument with a mutual friend of ours who shall go unnamed because he is not associated with this podcast, but I think you know who I'm talking about if I'm
of course I do.
With someone about movies. Okay. Yeah. I want to say, when we were like 12, we had this argument about who actually won.
You did. And that's funny. So you're 12-year-olds, you watched King Kong versus Godzilla, and this is, by the way, so long ago. It was before nerds became more normal and accepted. Like, being a nerd was different back then. It was more fun, in fact, when it was more of a taboo. But anyway, so two 12-year-olds, and what was the discussion?
In hindsight, he was probably right, but this was 12-year-old me, and 12-year-old is like prime Godzilla territory, so I was like, yeah. Oh, there's no way Godzilla would have lost, and I'm going to edit that part out because I don't want to say his name. And
the other person...
And the other person, our mutual friend, said that, well, according to the end of the movie, it is King Kong that swims away, and, you're 12-year-olds, and you're...
But you were not having it. Like, no, Godzilla can't lose. No, he can't.
That was probably exactly how the argument went, because when you're that age, your debate skills are at the scale of, nuh-uh.
Yeah.
So...
See, and I'm neutral. That's usually how things work, is that everybody takes a different side. That's how it always was when we were young, trying to do debating different things. But I think that it's more of a draw. I don't think there is a clear winner, even if the studio obviously had an intention in mind for King Kong to be the winner and to swim away triumphantly. I think that they both fought until they no longer had a reason to fight, because they were in a place where they can both just make an exit.
The winner was the little Godzilla in all of us.
Yeah, there's a little Godzilla in all of us.
That's
if nobody knows what that reference is, it's something that we quote constantly. But it's from Godzilla 2000. It's from that Godzilla. It's the final line of the film. I mean, what? That happened like 22 years ago that we saw that in the theater, and yet it's never left us since then.
Don't, you can't just hit me with that. That was 22 years ago like that, man. I wasn't prepared. Oh gosh, we're old.
We are old. You know, some jokes actually they ferment and develop over time. I don't know, but
Oh no, now I'm just hung up on the fact that I saw Godzilla 2000 in theaters 22 years ago.
yeah, I don't even go to theaters anymore.
Oh, I don't go to theaters very often anymore. I think I was actually thinking this a little while ago. I think the last 3 times I went to a movie theater was for Godzilla movies.
Yeah, there's some loyalty still there.
Oh,
I
that's what.
I feel like going to a theater is like, hey, do you want to ride the bus? Hey, do you want to go on a crowded train? It's like I feel the same way. It's like, no, I don't want to sit in a big room with a lot of people.
I guess it's a little different for me because I just, being the loser that I am, I just tend to go by myself. And since I work retail, so I usually don't get weekends off. So anytime I go see a movie, it's usually in the middle of the day while everyone else is at work or at school. So I'm
Yeah.
usually one of like 5 people in the theater. So it's not the social experience it is for a lot of other people when I usually end up going. But yeah, I think Godzilla versus King Kong was the last movie I saw in the theater, and probably the last movie I saw in the theater before that was probably the new Godzilla King of the Monsters, which came out 2018,
Okay.
and then
Yeah, you're like me. You hardly go. I went to see the new Batman recently because
I did,
a group of people wrangled me into it. It was not like a conscientious decision. And before that, I think I saw Dunkirk, and then that's like, what is that, like 2016, 2014, something?
uh,
A long time ago.
I haven't seen Dunkirk. I think the last time we and you went to a movie together, it was during the Ghostbusters,
Oh,
uh,
yeah. Wasn't even a
what's it
new
called, the
movie.
re-release?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, they
And
re-released Ghostbusters and like a few key theaters. And we went
yeah,
to that. We're not even
it was
seeing new
that.
movies.
Oh, I mean, at the very least, seeing Ghostbusters on the big screen, we did notice a couple things we never noticed before, like the maid in the background of the spray bottle trying to put out the fire.
Yeah. Yeah, there's little things that you don't really notice as well until you get that huge screen in front of you.
But by the way, spoiler alert for Ghostbusters, during one scene, there's a maid in the background trying to use a spray bottle to put out a fire. You might not have never. It's kind of like the Star Wars Star Trooper banging his hand on the door. Once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So, do you recommend King Kong versus Godzilla, BJ?
Um, I guess so. Like I said, it's not even one of my favorite Godzilla movies, but it's, I guess if you're going down the giant monster rabbit hole, it's one to tick boxes. You can't not watch it if you're going to watch a giant monster movie, I guess, if it's just for the cultural zeitgeist. Because, again, 60 years later, there's a new Godzilla versus King Kong movie,
Yeah. What do
so
you
they're,
think? Does this one compare to that one?
um, I don't know, they're both kind of stupid in different ways. I was not as big a fan as a lot of other people were of the new Godzilla vs. King Kong, but that was mostly because a good half of the human plot I found to be extremely annoying. By and large, in I was just saying that it while it's not impossible to have a good plot in a giant monster movie, by and large the human characters sort of exist to give the audience a vehicle to get from point A to point B to witness the action.
Yeah.
And then Godzilla versus Kong. There's basically, I'm not going to spoil it because it's still a
At
pretty
least
new
not
movie.
completely. Spoil it.
It's yeah. I mean, it's not like King Kong versus Godzilla, which is 60 years old. I don't feel bad about spoiling at all. This is still within like a couple years. But basically, there's two two human subplots. One's okay. The other one is I just found to be extremely annoying because it was sort of the comic relief subplot, and I just didn't find it amusing.
Okay.
And when the comic relief subplot is not funny, it's just kind of annoying. It kind of kills the whole point of it. So, again, just my opinion. So, if you're looking for a pure spectacle, I mean, obviously you can't argue that the new one's gonna have more spectacle. But if you're looking for two guys in the suit having at it and blowing up miniatures, you gotta go with the old one.
Okay. So there are some things about the old one that just remain completely classic and fun in their own way.
Well, like you said at the very beginning, there's nothing quite like seeing giant monsters step on toy Sherman tanks.
There isn't very much that's quite like that. I always like movies with miniatures. That's just me. I just love the little tiny details. Even if they're not done well, if they're not done very well and it's obvious, I kind of laugh, but I still enjoy it. The amazing amount of detail that somebody put into all that. They planted every tree, they made the grass look as good as they could. And then they had to make everything move. They had to make all those tanks move around and move up and fire and then move back again and go into a little underground bunker of some kind. It's all fun. It's fun.
Mm.
So what I would say is that this movie is a great film to just get together and watch, and you don't need to worry too much about the storyline unless you want to geek out over the storyline, which is great.
It's definitely a movie that invites a Mystery Science Theater 3000 treatment.
It does. It does. One of my favorite scenes is when they're on the island and they're looking for Kong. They're on their expedition to find him, and it's like lightning suddenly appears, and the next thing you know, one of them is attacked by this little lizard that he grabs and is like flinging around it with its tail. And it's just like suddenly, like, it just suddenly happens.
Oh, it's got me. Yes, the deadly plastic lizard's so dangerous that even after they throw it off the cliff, the other character has to take a pot shot at it with his rifle.
Yeah. Yeah. It just has a lot of fun moments like that. So this is like I haven't seen a lot of the Godzilla movies, but to me this seems like one of the most iconic of old films where two creatures were fighting and a lot of miniatures were added into the film. But we're going to see other Godzilla movies eventually, so maybe I will be wrong. Maybe some other ones are more iconic.
As far as Western audiences go, King Kong vs. Godzilla is probably the standard bearer for giant monster brawls, just because it's probably the biggest name because it does involve Kong, which was a much bigger character than Godzilla back in the day.
Yeah.
But yes, I will be certain to inflict more Godzilla movies on you at some point.
Bring it on.
So, anything else?
No, this is...
Sweet.
Yeah, people should go watch it.
We somehow still managed to talk for an hour about this?
Yeah, somehow. Somehow we talk. I even have a lot more I want to say, but it may not be as useful.
Well, if you have anything on your chest, final call.
Final call. Maybe there's a
I
little King Kong
I think I pretty much
in
said
all
my
of us.
piece.
Maybe inside all of us, BJ, there's a conflict between Godzilla and King Kong, and it's a constant struggle for who will step on the toy tank. And
well,
I don't know.
Well, you just have to keep digging through that rock until you hit something solid, so you stop.
Yeah. Another Godzilla 2000 reference.
It's no jokes like inside jokes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. We've done enough damage, perhaps.
Okay, we're got to the point where we're tangenting about inside jokes, so it's probably time to stop for the sake of the people.
Yeah.
Okay, so is that everything you wanted to say?
Yeah. Go ahead and do a closer, because you're good at that stuff.
Okay, that was everything I wanted to say. So to the few brave souls that made it this far, thank you for listening to us ramble on about King Kong versus Godzilla. I was BJ, with me is Jeff, and we will see you for whatever we talk about next time.
So long.